cold and wet December day in Stockport near Ambrose Woodford Aerodrome. Nothing too unusual there for the north of England. However, it certainly won't dampen the enthusiasm of plucky northerner Al as he tries out Just Flight's new AVRO Vulcan in the latest 4.4 version of Lockheed Martin's Prepared. With a new simulator and a new aeroplane to try out, it seems Christmas might have come early for simulator fans. So without further ado, let's take a quick look at the new Vulcan and put her through her paces.
Hello and welcome to a quick review stroke preview of Just Flight's new AVRO Vulcan for FSX and Prepared. My name's Al, or if you know me from the AvSim forums, Jock. And what the? Jumbo, is that you? Well, what are you doing here? We're not looking at Just Flight's new Jumbo. That's we'll be having a look at that in a couple of weeks. Yes, I know. I'm very excited about that too. But we're looking at their Vulcan. Oh, that's not why you're here. Well, why are you here? Oh, I see. You're the elephant in the room. Okay, don't worry. I was going to mention it. Now, you go and run along, and I'll see you when we look at the Jumbo. Okay? Sorry about that. What Jumbo was reminding me of was a bit of an elephant in the room with regard to this new AVRO Vulcan, and that is the price that Just Flight are charging for it. Now, I've seen online on a couple of forums and such, and in fact on the Just Flight forum as well, that people were a little bit surprised at the price of it. If you know Just Flight, then you'll know that typically what they more or less charge for most of their add-ons is somewhere around £27.99, 30 quid, that kind of price. But the this new AVRO Vulcan is £39.99. So about 10 quid more. And a few people have said, excuse me, a few people have said, it's a bit on the pricey side, isn't it? You know, I was kind of expecting it to be the typical Just Flight price. But if you've been watching Just Flight in recent years and following the sort of developments and things that they've been involved in, you will know that they have been upping their game considerably for quite some time. If you've seen things like their various PA-28s that they've brought out, or their Trinidad and Tobago TB10 and TB20, you'll know that the in-house Just Flight development team are really knocking things out of the park. And some of you will probably know that they were quite heavily involved in sort of partnership development with Dovetail's sort of stillborn flight sim world simulator, which unfortunately has fallen by the wayside, but not before Just Flight got out a PAA-28 for it, which used PBR textures, and so they've been involved in sort of like pushing the envelope quite a bit, and it's no more apparent than in this new Vulcan. Now, I must admit that when I saw the price of it, I thought, yeah, that's a little bit more than I thought they were going to charge for it. But I bought it anyway, and I thought, well, I'll give it a look. And sure enough, when I installed it and fired it up, I did what everyone else does when they get themselves a shiny new add-on for their flight simulator. They go, well, I'll read the manual in a bit. Let's just crank the thing up and kick the tires and light the fires. So sure enough, I fired the thing up, and straight away it started becoming very apparent that Just Flight have gone all out on this one. It's a very detailed simulation. It's very nice. There's a couple of clues anyway when you buy the thing. The size of the download is a lot bigger than other stuff that's come from Just Flight. I think, if I recall correctly, I think it was 1.2 gigabytes in size. And considering that you get 11 repaints with this Vulcan, and yeah, you get a couple of different sort of exhaust pipe variants of it, but you know, it is really just one plane. and 11 repaints on one plane, but it's 1.2 gigabytes in size. Bit of a clue that there's a bit more going on with this thing. Now, the other thing that's a bit of a clue is when you actually do look at the manual. The PDF manual is, excuse me, the PDF manual is 88 pages long, and believe me, if you want to fly this thing properly, you are going to have to read a bit of that, because the Vulcan is quite a complicated aeroplane. It has, well, it had one of the sort of early kind of precursors of fly-by-wire with artificial field systems for the controls because of the speeds that it could travel at, and it had a built-in APU and all kinds of interesting things like that. So it isn't just a crank up the engines and off you go type aeroplane. You will have to read up a lot. And when we have a look at the cockpit, we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. But here we are looking at the exterior view of the thing, and if you look behind, you can see that there is another white Vulcan behind it. That's the part of the. There's nothing to do with Just Flight. That's the part of the static aircraft scenery for the airfield that we're at here, which is UK 2000's Woodford aerodrome, which is part of their airfields package. And it's kind of appropriate for the Vulcan because Woodford, sadly no more an airfield in existence. There's still some remnants of it, and it's where the AVRO Museum is nowadays. But in its heyday, it was where a lot of AVRO aircraft were developed and tested and built, including the Lancaster, and the Vulcan too. And it's an airfield that I'm very familiar with because I used to go to air shows there all the time, and still find myself down there quite often because the AVRO Museum is there, and my horsey is stabled just up the road from it. So there you go. But anyway, here we are. Here's the exterior view of the Vulcan. This is installed in Lockheed Martin's prepared version 4.4, so shiny new airplane, shiny new simulator, and as you can see, I'll just kind of move this thing around so you can get a look at it. That is a very nice model. I've got the simulation paused at the minute because excuse me, because I don't want the engine noise to be sort of drowning out what I'm trying to say to you. But if we zoom in on this thing, you can see that this is a very, very nice model, nice texturing. The other thing that you might notice as well is if I move this view around really, really quickly, I'm not having any problems with frame rates here. This thing's running really quickly, and if when we get this thing up in the air, or if I sort of spin the view round there, I've got the graphics turned up fairly high on this, and beyond the airfield scenery is Orbex's UK scenery with the trees on. I've also got the AI traffic up quite high, and a couple of miles away from this airfield in the simulator is Manchester Airport, which has a lot of traffic on it, so that'll be loading in all the AI traffic. And about 30 miles away is Liverpool Airport, John Lennon. And both of those in my simulator are, again, UK 2000 payware versions of the airports. And there are a few other sort of smaller airports that are payware that are installed around the area. So there's a lot of AI traffic flying about. There's ground traffic as well, which we might see when we fly about. And you've got Active Sky doing the weather as well. So it's not as if I have dumbed down the graphics a little bit to get this to get a decent frame rate. It is getting a decent frame rate, regardless of regardless of the fact that it is a shiny sort of complicated add-on aeroplane. So here it is on the external view. Now you can see that what I've got is an electrical start accumulator trolley there, and on the other side there is an air start cart on there, and we've got the chocks on, and you can see that it's got the covers on the engines. I'll just open the exit as well. We're also going to hit Shift E, so we can see that, and hopefully if I unpause it, we'll see that opening up. Now, obviously, when I unpaused it, you can hear some sort of engine noises going on there, but there you go. There's the little access ladder. I'll close that, and what I will do is I'll pause it again so I'm not talking over the engine noise. Anyone who has ever ever been in a Vulcan will know that you get in the thing by climbing up that ladder there, and what happens then is you smack your head on all sorts of levers and controls that are sticking out if you're not very, very careful, because what you do is you end up sort of coming up in between behind the seats, a bit like how you get into the cockpit of some other bombers like the Flying Fortress, for example. So if we have a look inside this thing here, so I shall go inside. Here we are. We can see the virtual cockpit. Now, this is one of the first things that starts to give away that this is a very nice and really rather complex add-on. For a kickoff, you can see that there is a very, very detailed virtual cockpit. Very nicely done. Lots of realistic textures on there. One thing to note about this, however, is that anyone who's ever been in a Vulcan cockpit for real will know that it is actually quite dark inside a Vulcan cockpit, because you have all this shrouding around here and not very many windows, because the Vulcan was intended to be a nuclear bomber. And so there's a lot of shielding so that the flash from the explosion wouldn't blind the crews. So it is actually quite dark in the Vulcan's cockpit for real. So what I've done is I've compensated a little bit by turning the brightness up a little bit. So if you think my simulator's a little bit on the bright side, I've done that for a reason. Now, if I unpause this, you'll see that, well, you'll hear there's power being delivered to the aircraft, but we haven't actually got the engines started yet. But if you have a little bit of a look around the cockpit, we can see that they've gone into a lot of detail here. So you can see that there's the little flash visors up there going on, and another interesting thing that you will see when I start the engine, which I'm going to do in a second, is that you'll see that there is a lot of detail going on near them. So I'm going to do that. Now, up at the top top left-hand side, I should say, of the screen, you can see that there is a little panel where you can bring up some of the 2D panels, and the first one that I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the one at the top left, and that toggles the power. So when I hit that, what's going to happen is that's going to start cranking the engines. It's one of several ways that you can crank the engines. You can crank them off the auxiliary power unit, you can do cartridge starts, you can do a fast start, which the real aircraft could do, where you started all 4 engines at the same time, or you can start them individually. But having hit that that little button there, if we have a look on the external view, what you'll see is that that has removed the covers from the engines, and the engines are cranking up, and so I probably ought to put the parking brake on, which I will do since we're starting the engines, and you can see that all of the ground carts have moved out of the way. Now, going back into the virtual cockpit, so there are several ways that you can start the engines on this Vulcan. You can go completely realistic with it, and of those ways that you can start it, there are a couple of them, or you can go a little bit easier. If you want to go full-on realism on this thing, if we see a couple of the other panels that are on there, you can see an ACP panel there, and you can see the AAPP, which is the airborne auxiliary power. You can mess around with this and like switch the buses in and out and all this kind of stuff. So all of this is running power at the moment, because I used that electrical start thing there. But if you want to mess around with this sort of stuff and do it all by the book and check everything, then you absolutely can do that sort of thing. And if you want to do that, there is actually one of the things that Just Flight did do when they were doing stuff for Flight Sim World was they got very involved in the interactive checklist that were going to be a part of Flight Sim World, and they've kind of taken that experience of doing that sort of thing and incorporated what they learned from all that kind of stuff and put that in a lot of their more recent editions. For example, the the PA-28s and the Trinidad and Tobago have got that sort of thing going on. So if we have a look at this, you've got interactive checklists, as in you can go down this thing and check them. So we can see there that the auxiliary power air scoop is open, and we check that off. So I click on it and it goes green. And have I got the electrical power off and all this kind of stuff? So you can go through these things and check them out, and there's a couple of pages of that. So it's kind of nice that you've got built-in checklists that you can use for that sort of thing. So that's another thing that you've got. The other things that you get with this little panel up on the left-hand side is you've got a flight computer where you can see what the fuel burn is and what your range is and your endurance and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of fun. And then last but not least, what you've got is this thing, the payload menu. Now, it's worth noting that this is the, as I say, this is the shiny new Just Flight Vulcan. It's for FSX and P3D, but there is also an expansion pack available for it, whereby you can pay another £10 and you get K2 and MRR variants. The K2 is the air-to-air refueling tanker variant, where they put a drogue on the back of the Vulcan and put some fuel tanks in the bomb bay so that it could be used as a tanker. And the MRR version is the maritime reconnaissance version, where it had a lot of sort of radars and pods and all that kind of stuff, and that was used for all kinds of stuff. Obviously maritime reconnaissance, but the RAF also used that to sort of analyse the effects of nuclear weapons by flying the aircraft through the sort of mushroom clouds of nuclear explosions and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now it's worth noting that whether you have that or not, this Vulcan can do air-to-air refueling, so you could do it with another aircraft in Prepared or FSX if you wanted to. But if you really want to go for it and you've got a friend online and you want to fly online or what have you, what you could do is you could have someone refueling you from another Vulcan if you really wanted to. All of the other stuff that's on there, but you would need that expansion to be able to make use of the MRR pods. All of the other stuff you can put on if you want to. There are lots and lots of different bits of ordnance on there that you can throw on there. The most famous one is effectively the weapon that the Vulcan was built for, if you like. The Vulcan was one of 3 aircraft that the UK built in the sort of late 50s, early 60s, and they were the V bomber force. There was the Valiant and the Victor, one of which was really rather short-lived, and the other one spent most of its career being a tanker. But the Vulcan, up until sort of very late on in its career, was the main bomber, the big delta wing fast thing. And what it was able to carry was the Blue Steel missile. That was a rocket-powered missile that had a nuclear warhead, and had a range of about 550 miles, I think, something like that. And the intention was that the Vulcan would sort of leather it towards its targets, but before it got into surface-to-air missile range, what it would do is it would release the Blue Steel missile, which was a standoff land attack missile. Subsequently, that sort of thing ended up getting replaced by ballistic missiles, as it did with most air forces. But at the time, when the Vulcan went into service, that was its intent. It was going to be a nuclear bomber, which is why, if I close this thing down, which is why when we look on the external view, the Vulcan that you can see in the background there, which is, as I say, part of the UK2, there's the scenery, is white. Originally, all the Vulcans were white, and that was so that they would resist the flash of nuclear explosions. So they had that to help resist the flash of the nuclear explosions, but what they also had was a very heavily shrouded cockpit, so there wouldn't be a blinding flash lighting up. And hopefully, if you'd fired off your nuclear missile, what you would then do is turn around and head back to your base, so hopefully the flash would be behind you. So that's what all that's about. Now, back in the virtual cockpit, you can see that this thing's really rather detailed, and there are a lot of nice details going on in it. anyone who's ever been in any sort of jet fighter or worked on jet fighters, or in fact worked on any airplane, will know that there are a lot of safety pins and remove before flight pins that you have to take off the airplane in order for it to go. And you can see some of these here that have been stowed. You can see the safety pins that have been stowed. These are the ones for the ejector seat, for the seat pan firing handle and all this kind of stuff. And you can put those back in to the seat if you want. So you can see there that there they are in place, which would mean that the ejector seat wouldn't fire. And of course, if we take all these things out, there's the drogue gun. That's the pistol that fires out the small parachute that opens up and drags the main chute out when it ejects and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm going to take those things off. And then you would, of course, stow them in there. Now, you don't really need to do that, but it's kind of indicative of the level of detail that's going on in this thing. Another interesting thing, which sort of highlights the level of detail that they've gone to, is that now we've got electrical power. You can see that the oxygen system is working, and if I zoom in on that, you can see the oxygen indicator there. Oh, bit of a sort of glitch as it zoomed in. There we go. So you can see there that the oxygen blinker, which is a feature that you see in a lot of Second World War aeroplanes and early 50s and 60s airplanes, indicating that the oxygen system is flowing. It's intended to sort of look a little bit like breathing or what have you. Now you can see that in quite a few add-on aeroplanes, but one thing that a lot of those those other add-on aeroplanes do is it's just a bit of eye candy, but it isn't on this one. On the Just Fly Vulcan, what that actually is doing is that's actually simulating using the oxygen. The real Vulcan has, I think it's 12 oxygen bottles in the forward part of the bomb bay, and there is an oxygen indicator there, and you will see as you fly along that this thing actually is using up the oxygen. That needle, that little indicator needle there, will go down and it will simulate using oxygen. And that's kind of interesting because another thing that Just Flight have done with this is there is more than one way to pressurize the Vulcan. The Vulcan could be pressurized with a combat setting, where it would be pressurized, but it would be to a slightly reduced pressure, so that if it took some damage there would be less chance of an explosive decompression. Or it could be pressurized for cruise settings, slightly higher pressure and stuff like that, and a lot of that kind of kicked in when it went above 20,000 feet and stuff like that, and both those things have been simulated on this, so it's kind of indicative of the level of detail that they've gone to, that it is simulating all that sort of thing. So this comes back to what I was saying about people thinking, $39.99, that's rather expensive. Well, when you see all the kind of things that they've gone for here, you can kind of see that that is starting to justify the price. Another interesting thing that we've got going on here is you've got a fairly conventional blind flying panel here. However, you'll notice that the artificial horizon is a little bit different from a typical artificial horizon, and this is what the artificial horizon looks like in the real Vulcan. In that what it actually does is, in the Vulcan, it has two separate readouts. It has the horizon readout, but it also has a pitch readout, and they're separated from one another, whereas in most artificial horizons that's kind of like a combined thing. So very, very accurate in the way that they've depicted what's going on. Now, as far as the Vulcan's instrument panel is concerned, so you've got the typical blind flying stuff here, you know, altimeter, Mach meter, airspeed indicator, vertical speed indicator, all this kind of stuff. Then to the right of that, what you've got is you've got the engine instruments there, so you can see the RPMs and the oil pressure and all that kind of stuff. And then you've got the landing gear switches and a few switches for hydraulics and stuff like that. To the right of that, you've got the co-pilot's panel, which is effectively a mirror image of the pilot's blind flying panel. There are a couple of interesting things to note, though, again, to do with the realism. Now, I am going to move my joystick. You might be able to hear that. My microphone might pick up that I'm moving the joystick. I'm pulling it backwards and forwards, moving it left and right, and you can see that the joystick in the Vulcan is not moving at all. And why is that? And it's because I haven't got things properly powered up, because the Vulcan had an artificial feel system in it, because it would this thing would be going very, very fast. It was intended to sort of like hammer it towards its targets at very, very high speed. And you can get control difficulties with delta wings at those sorts of speeds and stuff like that. So it had an artificial field system, which is kind of a bit of a precursor of the sort of thing that that Concorde and Airbuses have, and all this kind of stuff. That kind of fly-by-wire stuff. And because I've not got that configured properly, the controls aren't moving. So if we have a look down on the left-hand side here, I'm going to move the armrest out of the way like that. You can see this panel here with all the lights on, and what that's indicating is that I haven't got this set up properly. Now I can start switching these things out individually, or what I can do is I can use these switches here. You'll notice it says ARE alongside that. If I zoom in on it, you can see that there, which I'm sure you can probably work out is aileron, rudder and elevator, although strictly speaking that would be ailerons and elevons, because obviously the Vulcan is a delta winged aeroplane. So I'm going to hit these little buttons on here, and you can see those lights going out now. And now what I will have is I will have control. So you can see now when I'm moving my joystick, that joystick is actually moving, and it's going backwards and forwards like that. And then if I kick the rudder bar there, you can see that this is moving too. So this is what I was talking about it's not an aircraft where you're just going to sort of install it, jump into it and hope that you can work everything, because that kind of stuff will catch you out if you don't read up. As I say, it's an 88-page manual that comes with the Vulcan, but don't be too concerned about that. I mean, it didn't take me that long to read it, and you only really need to read the bits that sort of the systems and what have you. It's you can skip the history bit of it, and there's a nice flight tutorial in it, but you don't have to do that as well. But the flight tutorial will take you through all this, right from starting the thing up properly to flying it to a destination, landing it, shutting it down properly. So if you're interested in all that kind of thing, the manual certainly will teach you all that sort of stuff. Now you can see there, good attention to detail. You can see the little toe loops on the rudder pedals with Parma on them. Parma as in Parma Aero Corps, the company that made the rubber aero tyres. You might have seen that on World War I aeroplanes. What is unusual in the Vulcan, if you've never seen the cockpit of one before, is that for such a big aeroplane, it doesn't have a yoke. It has a joystick, which is kind of a surprise to some people sometimes. But at the right speed, the Vulcan is reasonably aerobatic. I mean, it's not really intended to be an aerobatic aeroplane, but it was definitely rolled a few times at air shows, which surprised people the first time they saw that such a big aeroplane doing that kind of thing. But it is capable of pulling those sorts of moves. Now, another interesting thing that's worth noting about it is when people are going 39 quid for an add-on from Just Flight. They've done a good job of the flight modelling. The Vulcan has some interesting things going on with it. If I switch back to an external view and we have a look at this, and I'll just kind of come around the back of it a little bit, you'll see the control surface is moving there, and I'm moving the stick from side to side, so I'm getting aileron control there, and then moving it back to get elevator control. So it's kind of elevons. Now, even if you didn't know too much about how the Vulcan works, or delta wing aircraft in general, I'm sure you can probably work out that an aeroplane like this, you could run into control problems, because what if you want full elevator deflection, but you want to put some aileron input in as well? There are some quirks to the Vulcan where if you've got some roll, you won't necessarily get full elevator or authority and all this kind of stuff. And another interesting thing about the Vulcan is if you ever speak to any pilots who flew the Vulcan, what they will tell you is that you really have to kick it into turns. You have to get on the rudder early to throw it into turns, and you have to give it a lot of rudder, particularly at low speed. It's not dissimilar to flying a glider in some respects, where anyone who's ever flown a glider will know that you really have to kick in a lot of rudder to overcome the adverse yaw. So, you know, the glider pilots who have a go at this thing will probably find that a little bit easier to get into. But what Just Flight have done is they've done a really good job of simulating all that kind of stuff, and so that's another thing that you are paying for. Whilst we're on this external view, one thing that I will be critical of though is this. That nav light is a bit weedy, and that's one of my personal dislikes of a lot of add-on aeroplanes, not just from Just Flight, from a lot of companies. Guys, make the nav lights brighter. Oddly enough, something that came out just the other week that Just Flight are selling, which is Aeroplane Heaven's flying boxcar C119. Just Flight very often work with Aeroplane Heaven, and now if you have a look at that one, the nav lights on that are really bright. So well done, Aeroplane Heaven, you did a great job on that. Interestingly, something else that's coming out. I already mentioned the 200 series jumbo that Just Flight are releasing very soon. They've got a Caravelle, and the Caravelle, unlike this Vulcan and unlike the jumbo, which are totally in-house Just Flight developments, the Caravelle that they're bringing out early next year, as in early 2019, is a collaborative effort from Aeroplane Heaven and Just Flight, just as an aside. So hopefully that will have good nav lights on it. Come on, Just Flight, make them nav lights brighter. Anyway, that's probably about the only criticism I've got of this thing. Interestingly, even though this is, whilst we're looking at this view, even though theoretically you only get a B2 Vulcan variant on this and not the K2 and the MRR, you do nevertheless in this version get two different exhaust variants. Vulcans, they could have slightly different engines depending on which one it was, and so if you want to repaint a specific Vulcan, because there is a paint kit for this, the other slightly different exhaust nozzles are also available to you. So, you know, I'm saying it's only one plane with 11 repaints that you get. Strictly speaking, it's two to account for the engine variant. So anyway, sticking it back in the cockpit. So yes, the flight model is, they've done a really good job on it. It's not just some copy and paste, make it a plane type thing. They've actually done a really nice job on it. Now, because we've got this control system correctly configured now, so the control surfaces work, what we can see is this thing here, where you can see the control deflections, and that was the reason for it, because what the Vulcan has is it has an artificial feel system for certain flight control regimes, which is what this feel lock thing is here. Now, if you don't take the trouble to read the manual, what you could find is that this thing will start going past 250 knots, and you won't be able to sort of like pitch it as much as you think you could, or maybe you won't be able to get the gear up and stuff like that. And that behaviour is very similar to the real aeroplane. Other interesting things, they could have just put any old windscreen wiper effect on, but check this out. Here we go, the windscreen wipers. 2-speed with the sounds off the real aircraft. Pretty cool, eh? Other stuff that's going on, I mean, obviously, you know, we can start moving these armrests out of the way. You can see the Vulcan doesn't just have a really basic throttle where you firewall it. What it has is a little bit like the Airbus. It's got It's got preset throttle settings for takeoff and cruise and stuff like that. So there's a little bit more to flying the Vulcan than meets the eye, certainly with that control system and certainly with the throttles. And all of that stuff is realistically emulated. There are other things. You'll notice that there's quite a few fuel gauges on there and stuff like that. The Vulcan had a fairly complex fuel system whereby you were supposed to use some of the tanks in the that were in the Bombay area first in order to keep the center of gravity correct and all that. All that's been simulated accurately as well, which is pretty cool. Then, of course, if we start looking over here, what we've got is all of the stuff for, you know, the air-to-air refueling and all this kind of business and various bits and bobs. One of the interesting things is the real Vulcan, because it's a product of the late 50s and 1960s, would have used TACAN navigation, which isn't greatly simulated in either FSX or P3D. So they've had to make a bit of a concession to that, and the radio systems that would normally be able to tune TACAN are going to be able to tune the navs that are available in your flight simulator. And there's a bit of a concession to assist you in that. What you have also got is you've got on the instrument panels, they have included the standard GPS. So if you're a little bit concerned about, oh, am I going to be able to fly it, you know, when it's got all these kind of old navigation systems, yes, you are. The real Vulcan had a crew of 5 and had 2 navigators on it. One was sort of like the navigator for the weapon systems, and the other one was the navigator for actually getting where you wanted to go. That part of the inside of the aircraft has not been simulated. The bit for the engines and stuff like that is simulated with these panels here. But as far as the inside of the aircraft is concerned, we've only really got the cockpit area. If I switch the views on that, you'll see co-pilot's view. This, if you've ever climbed into a Vulcan, that is the bit where you come up the ladder and then you start smacking your head on the fire extinguishers and the levers that are sticking out and stuff like that. So if you ever go and visit a Vulcan, climb into it, watch your head when you get in. So anyway, and you can see that there are some preset views on there that we can go for if we want to. Of course, if you've got an additional camera, there's nothing to stop you putting those views on yourself, or, you know, if you've got track IR, then, you know, less of a problem and stuff. As I say, you know, the need to be able to simulate things realistically, one of the very obvious things is this control thing here where you can see the control deflections. Obviously you need to be able to see that because you really can't see the airframe at all from inside a Vulcan, for the reasons that I've stated before, that it was intended to only have very, very small windows to protect from the flash of a nuclear explosion. That kind of Italian sports car technique, if you like, of why bother putting a rear view mirror on the thing, because what's behind you is not important. So there you go, a very, very nice cockpit. And, you know, having been in the cockpit of a few Vulcans, apart from the fact that I've taken the brightness up a little bit so that we can have a look at this, I can tell you now, this looks exactly like the real thing. It really gets that look very well. And if I played around with the brightness setting on my simulator and dimmed this down a little bit, it would be very much like being in the real cockpit. And they've done a nice job of sort of like simulating the wear and tear on the thing. Not too over the top. It doesn't look like it's just taxied out of a scrap yard, but it looks like it's been used, you know, because the Vulcan was in service for a long time. So anyway, let's have a drive of the thing, shall we? Now, obviously, what I can do is I can use keyboard shortcuts to do stuff, but all of this, yeah, I would say, I guess probably 95% of the stuff in this virtual cockpit's working. You know, as I say, you know, there's some concessions to things like, for example, you know, TACAN navigation not really that possible in the flight simulator, so they've had to make a few concessions to that. But you're gonna have to look pretty hard to find something that doesn't work. You know, for example, the the drogue parachute for braking works and stuff like that. There's a very nice animation. So they've really kind of gone for it. And when you start seeing all this sort of thing, it's then that you realise that, yeah, $39.99 is not actually too over the top a price, really, when you can see how nice this thing is, how detailed the simulation is of the thing, and what have you, and not only that, how well it actually runs, because it will probably not have escaped your attention that here I am talking away, recording my voice, recording the screen, recording what we're seeing in Fraps, which is notorious for eating up your frame rates when you use Fraps, and I've got everything pretty much on full throttle. Got a lot of add-ons going on. I've got AI traffic on. I've not turned that off. I've got the road traffic on. In fact, if you don't believe me, I shall zoom in this view, and you should see some cars going down the road. So there you go. Just to sort of prove that you know, I've got all that AI stuff on, not turned it off. I'm not doing anything sneaky like, you know, recording this at half speed or anything. This thing gets really, really good frame rates. Some of that, I have to say, is down to the newest version of Prepared, Lockheed Martin's P3D version 4.4. They've done a real great job, Lockheed Martin, of optimizing that. So some of that's down to that, but, you know, credit where it's due to Just Flight. They've got this thing going very, very well. So let's give it some, shall we? So, bit of throttle there to get us rolling. Quick brake test. And incidentally, if I hadn't sorted out that control system, this thing wouldn't be steering. So, there you go. So that's the other reason I chose the Woodford scenery and parked the plane where I did for this video, is it's a very, very short taxi to the runway. So there you go. Now, you probably heard a little brake squeak then. It's worth pointing out that I have in my flight simulator, I have got A2A's AccuFeel add-on running, which will give me a little bit of turbulence and brake squeak and stuff like that. And anyone who's got Active Sky will know that that can throw in a bit of turbulence effects as well. So bear in mind that not everything that we're seeing here is what you actually what you're actually going to get if you haven't got those add-ons. I'm going to do my level best to line this up on the runway. This is 07 at Woodford, which is the one that tended to get used the most, I would say. And the reason that I'm lining it up is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off on the external view, which might make steering a little bit difficult, but there's a reason for that. Anyone who ever saw a Vulcan fly at an air show will know that it was incredibly loud. I've not got the sound up too loud on my flight simulator because obviously I need to record this voiceover. But if you ever saw a Vulcan at an air show putting on a display, you will know that it used to set off every single car alarm within miles and make little children cry and all that kind of stuff. The thing was incredibly loud. Now, obviously, Just Flight have, you know, they don't want to be deafening their customers, but they do need to get the sound right, and they've done a pretty good job of that. And I'm going to demonstrate that here. So here we are on the tower view. And there you go. You could see cars moving in the distance. So I haven't just got the traffic on very, very light settings. You can see cars whizzing away like crazy. Now I'm going to throttle this thing up. Now I might not keep this on the runway, but you want to hear the sound anyway. Yeah. So we'll chance it. So I've got the throttle to about halfway, and you should hear it start winding up. And then I'm going to put the power up again. And off she goes. I'm going to get the gear up there. It's a pretty good engine sound, that, isn't it? Okay, now so I'll switch it back to an external view. And there you go. Just knock the sound off for a second. But just to prove that, you know, I wasn't lying about having the graphics turned up there. There you go. You can see UK 2000 to Manchester Airport in the background there. Now you might notice a little bit of shaking going on here on the aeroplane, and that's because this thing's accelerating like crazy, and it's getting a little bit twitchy on the controls. So that's one of those things that you've got to be careful of. I'm going to put the sound back on. We'll get back in the cockpit, because the real thing had 4 Olympus engines, Bristol Olympus engines, which eventually became Rolls-Royce Olympus engines, £20,000 thrust each. That's £80,000 thrust on this thing, which is why it sets off like a rocket. So there you go. Now, of course, with that amount of power, if you really, really want to, you can point this thing at the sky and it'll start climbing like a homesick angel. Because the Vulcan had a lot of power, and it was a very fast aeroplane, so that Mach meter wasn't there for fun. Anyway, there you go. Quick look at the just like Vulcan for FSX and prepared. Very nice thing. From the days when Britain made the best aeroplanes. And, you know, courtesy of Just Flight, they kind of still do. So there you go. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Bye-bye.